The old man walked alone through the twilight streets, his footsteps echoing off the worn brick buildings. He wore a long, black coat with a threadbare velvet collar, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. The wind whipped his coat-tails behind him like a dark banner, and the moon cast an eerie glow on the cobblestones at his feet. He moved with a purpose, his eyes fixed on some unseen destination, his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his coat. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the old man's breath misted in the chill air as he walked. As he turned a corner, the buildings seemed to loom closer, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The old man's eyes flicked upwards, his gaze lingering on the crumbling facades, the rusting fire escapes, the broken windows that stared back like empty eyes. He stopped before a door adorned with a faded sign that creaked in the wind, Mrs. Kirsch's boarding house. The old man's gaze was drawn to the top floor, where a light flickered behind a curtain that seemed to ripple and shimmer like the surface of a stagnant pool. The old man's eyes lingered on the window, his face a map of deep lines and creases, his skin as pale as the moon above. For a long moment, he stood there, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths, as if he were willing himself to move forward. Finally, he pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the musty darkness of the boarding house. The air inside was heavy with the smell of stale air, yesterday's cooking, and the distant tang of decay. A narrow staircase spiraled upwards, its carpeted treads worn to threads in the center, like a path of worn velvet. The old man began to climb, his footsteps slow and deliberate, the creaking of the stairs echoing through the empty halls. On the top floor, he paused before a door that seemed to lean inward, as if it too were listening to the whispers of the house. A small plaque on the door read Mrs. Amelia, the letters worn but still legible in the dim light. He raised a hand, hesitated, and then knocked 3 times, each rap like a muffled drumbeat in the stillness. The door creaked, and a sliver of dim light fell across the old man's face, casting an eerie glow on his skin. A low, husky voice whispered, "Enter," and the old man stepped forward, disappearing into the shadows. The room was a sepulchre of shadows, the air thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. The old man's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, and he made out the form of a woman, Mrs. Amelia, reclining on a worn velvet couch, her face a map of lines and wrinkles. Her eyes, sunken and dark, watched him with an unblinking gaze, as if she had been waiting for him for a very long time. The room was a testament to the transience of life, filled with the detritus of forgotten dreams and shattered hopes. Faded photographs hung on the walls, their faces obliterated by the patina of time. A music box, its lid open, played a tinny, mournful tune, the notes like the whispers of the damned. Mrs. Amelia's voice, low and husky, seemed to caress the old man's ear. "I've been waiting for you, her?" She paused, her eyes narrowing, as if searching for a name. The old man's voice was like the rustling of dry leaves. "Karl, I am Karl." He moved closer, his eyes fixed on the woman, his gaze drinking in the contours of her face. Mrs. Amelia's lips, thin and pale, curved into a smile. "Welcome, Karl. I have something that belongs to you." Her hand, skeletal and pale, reached out, and the old man's eyes followed it, mesmerized, as if he were watching a serpent uncoil from its nest. Her fingers closed around a small, ornate box, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to writhe like living vines. The box itself was old, the wood cracked and worn, as if it had been buried in the earth for centuries. The old man's eyes locked onto the box, his pupils dilating as if he were beholding a relic from a forgotten age. "Ah, yes," Mrs. Amelia whispered, her voice like the sigh of a winter wind. "I think you've been searching for this for a very long time, Karl." Her eyes seemed to bore into his soul, as if she could see the very fabric of his being. The old man's hands, trembling like leaves, reached out, hesitated, and then closed around the box. The wood felt cold to the touch, as if it had been chilled to the very marrow. He lifted the lid, and a faint, pungent scent wafted out, like the stench of a charnel house. Inside, Nestled in a bed of black velvet lay a small porcelain mask. The face was a perfect, heart-shaped oval, with lips curved into a smile that seemed to mock the old man's own joyless existence. The eyes, black as coal, stared back at him, empty and unforgiving. The old man's breath caught in his throat as he gazed upon the mask. A shiver ran down his spine, and for an instant, he was transported back to a time long past, a time of laughter and tears, of joy and sorrow. The mask seemed to whisper secrets in his ear, secrets he thought he had long forgotten. Mrs. Amelia's voice, low and husky, whispered again, "You should have left this buried, Carl. Some secrets are better left unspoken." But the old man did not hear her. He was lost in the mask's empty eyes, drowning in the depths of his own forgotten past. The room around him melted away, and the old man was transported back to a time when laughter and tears had not yet been drained from his eyes. He saw himself as a young man, standing in a dimly lit corridor, the sound of whispers and muffled sobs echoing through the air. The mask, then just a whispered rumor, had been the focal point of 1,000 whispered secrets, a symbol of mystery and terror. As he gazed deeper into the porcelain face, the memories flooded back, each one a tiny, razor-sharp shard of glass that cut into his mind. He remembered the first time he had seen the mask, its presence like a cold wind that had blown through his life, leaving destruction in its wake. He had tried to bury the memories, to hide them behind a veneer of respectability, but the mask would not be silenced. Mrs. Amelia's voice, a distant echo, whispered again, "You should have left this buried, Carl." But the old man did not hear her. He was lost in the labyrinthine corridors of his own mind, reliving the horror and the passion that had once consumed him. The mask, once a symbol of terror, now seemed to mock him, its smile a cold, cruel jest. The old man's eyes, dry and empty, stared back at the porcelain face, and for an instant, it seemed as if the mask was about to speak. Its lips curled into a sneer that would shatter the silence of the room. In that moment, the old man knew that he was not alone. Something else was in the room with them, a presence that had been waiting patiently, watching and waiting. As the old man relived the memories of a lifetime, the air seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, as if the darkness itself was coalescing into a living, breathing entity. And then, the lights in the room began to flicker, like a dying heartbeat, and the old man knew that he was no longer alone in the darkness. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, as if the darkness itself was taking shape. The air was heavy with an unseen presence, a weight that pressed upon the old man's chest, making it hard to breathe. Mrs. Amelia's voice, a distant whisper, seemed to be calling out to him, but the old man could not tear his eyes away from the mask. The porcelain face seemed to be changing, the smile twisting into a snarl, the eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. The old man's heart raced, pounding in his chest like a drumbeat in the darkness. He tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the silence, swallowed by the shadows. Suddenly, the lights in the room died, plunging the space into total darkness. The old man was alone, surrounded by an unseen presence that seemed to be closing in around him. He could feel its cold breath on the back of his neck, could sense its eyes upon him, watching and waiting. In the darkness, the mask seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The old man's heart was racing, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps, as if he were drowning in the darkness. And then, a faint, flickering glow began to emanate from the mask itself, casting an eerie, unearthly light upon the walls of the room. The old man's eyes, fixed upon the mask, were drawn into its depths, as if he were drowning in its empty, black eyes. In that moment, the old man knew that he was beyond redemption, trapped in a living nightmare from which there was no escape. The mask, once a symbol of terror, had become his own personal hell, a reminder of the secrets he had kept hidden for so long.